What happened inside the appraisal shop earlier reminded Sophie of Lee Ji-yeon's sharp eyes looking at her that year, hesitantly asking, "Do you want to die?" "I thought I had buried my old memories deep down. But I didn't expect that this time I would be threatened by Lee Ji-yeon's ugly, scarred face." All because of that young man somehow made Sophie terrified. She ordered her subordinates to go back and investigate the brown-haired guy in the appraisal shop. When her subordinate asked if there was an appraiser investigating, Sophie immediately changed her mind. Her mouth smiled happily. "I wanted to kill both of them." His subordinates spoke up to stop Jin mooing, but Sophie dismissed them, saying that both of them deserved to die. She showed the necklace around her neck for her subordinates to see, smiled cutely and said that she would lend the artifact and the power of the god to kill the other two. The subordinates also wanted to advise them further because they were in a neutral area. Sophie moved the bracelet forward. Her face smiled kindly, but it emitted a terrible source of energy, causing the girl to step back immediately. "Don't dare argue anymore. The saint's will is my will." Kneeling on one knee with both hands respectfully accepting the bracelet Sophie gave her, she reminded herself that the saint's will was the will of heaven and the apostles must definitely carry it out. Sophie was finally satisfied, smiling kindly. Only then did she take back the image of the divine Aquarius, shining brightly behind her, and if she were to be careless again, she might even log this subordinate out. Lee Ji-yeon was sitting and chatting with Jin Myung in the store when he suddenly felt wet on his head. There was water flowing from somewhere outside the city center. The lights of shops and houses sparkle. Sung Jae left Ji-yeon in the appraisal shop, walking alone until he finished. Suddenly he looked down at his feet and saw something strange. So he stopped and looked at the puddle of water under his feet that he didn't know where it came from, which kept flowing more and more even though it wasn't raining. Sung Jae bent down to look more closely because he detected magic power in it. Suddenly the shadow in the water turned strangely white. His eyes lit up and he raised his hand to grab Sung Jae. The cup of iced milk. Coffee fell down immediately because of the disgusting scene in front of him. The water coalesced into the shape of a human crawling towards Sung Jae like crawling ghosts in a horror movie, making him turn pale. How could there be a ghost in a well-lit place in the middle of the street? Suddenly there was a scream behind him. Sung Jae turned around and discovered that everyone around him saw a water demon like him, rising from the ground and staring at his body. The person who caused that scene stood on the roof of the building looking down. Who else but Sophie Marty performs the mirror of humanity? Although the clones only have the same strength as A-level apostles. If there are too many ants, they can bite an elephant to death. What's more, there were only two people in the appraisal shop. One old and one young. Sung Jae ran back to the appraisal shop. And as soon as he saw the back of the saint's guardian, he immediately screamed, "Why are you using your fighting skills in the neutral zone like that? Cancel it immediately." She turned around and calmly looked at Sung Jae, holding an elaborately carved cup in her hand, saying, "This was an order from the saints so she should cut her mouth. This is the intention of the superiors." She suddenly placed the holy cup on the ground, activating the holy object, causing it to glow blindly. Sung Jae rushed forward in panic and wanted to stop. But there was no time. The column of light shot straight into the night sky as if a Big Bang concert was opening there. Dozens of streams of water emerged from the ground and swirled in large circles, covering all the people on the street, replicating as many water ghosts of the crowd. The female guard assigned them to go deal with Jin Myung together. And the young man who was a customer in that store would be handled by her herself. The water ghosts heard the order and rushed away immediately, creating a pile of squishy water above Ji-yeon's head just now. Sung Jae swam in the water ball, panicking and not understanding when they had planned to attack. His palms tried to summon strength. He had to quickly escape from here before losing consciousness. Sung Jae's vision gradually blurred and wanted to close. All around him was that water. Vast all that water. At that time, Ji-yeon was in the shop and discovered that this water containing magic power was not soaked in by the rain. He silently watched them descend more and more. Jin Myung also felt magic around him. While looking around, not understanding what was going on, he was lifted up high by the water gathering like a rope. Something sharp rushed forward from behind, close to Jeon's neck. He didn't seem too surprised. The female guard whispered, "Don't move." She didn't want to kill him yet, explaining that this was because he had displeased the saint. Still not forgetting to threaten to resist. That big belly should not be foolish. The holy woman ordered me to kill you too. But if you too admit your mistake to the holy woman and Myung buys the holy object at a high price, I will defend you in front of Sophie. What a kind female guardian. Knife at hand, attacking another person's neck and offering negotiating conditions that were too good. To the point that the appraisal uncle almost fell asleep when he heard it. So he didn't even bother to answer. Suddenly hearing Jeon despondently ask, "Is it normal to walk around with a knife in the middle of the street?" Myung opened, his eyes wide at the sight of him using 2 fingers to squeeze the handle of the knife and break it into several pieces. Maybe he's old or something. In his time no one dared to carry a weapon around. Jeon dropped the knife on the ground and smiled, telling Jin Myung to calculate how much damage there was so they could pay some money. Seeing Jeon break the sacred relic knife, and it seemed like he was on his side. But Jin Myung still didn't dare to speak up. What kind of person can do that with just their bare hands? Young subordinate probably thinks that I'm 30 years old and have never encountered such a situation before. Did you not listen when I told you not to move? The water ghosts gathered from behind Myung into a pile and rushed past Jeon, wanting to cover his mouth. But when they arrived, it was like a bunch of water thrown out of a basin because Jeon's punch knocked them all to pieces. Filled on the background, still with that punch, he smiled kindly. If you ask this question, why don't you just call them out and punch them? It's quite fun. The female bodyguard took a few steps back, warily looking at the young man in front of her. However, just as the saint had predicted, being able to punch a group of A-level water demons with her bare hands was certainly not a bad thing. If so, she must eliminate him to avoid endangering the saint. Even the way he calmly asked Jin Myung was so annoying. She pulled out the necklace Sophie had given her from her bosom and threw out a pile of water containing pure magical power that Sophie herself had put in. Several pools of water gradually formed the appearance of a pack of wolves. And according to the guard's mouth, they were a pack of orange-level water wolves. Using an orange level to ask to go on business with Jeon would have made him laugh. Sophie, the insect demon, had a way of welcoming him and really made fun of him. I wonder if he pulled out 2 daggers and asked Jin Myung if he could use these for a while? Whether or not the slice will be fried depends on his mood. Asking for a loan without Myung answering, Jeon installed the meter in his ass and rushed forward, confronting the aggressive water wolves alone. Wherever he went, he locked their muzzles there. He also howled in excitement. This knife was also very sharp. If you like it, drop a like. His knife hit the water wolves and immediately brought back the magical information of the treasure. Immediately turning on the butcher's sucker, Jeon rushed in and slashed at these A-level guys with so much joy. He laughed loudly. How could just appraising things be so fun? Where does his slash go? Jeon is spoiled there. He received fragments of the mirror experience, points and all kinds of nonsense related to the water wolves. The saint's subordinates didn't know what level of strategy they had. Now they were standing there, unable to believe their eyes. The saint's summoned beasts were killed so easily. Hey Crank, howl. Jeon's call made her so scared that her eyes almost fell out. This must be the final boss of some villain story. Why is the male lead so strange? Jeon was very excited about this killing scene, asking her if there was anything else she didn't want to show. His eyes were like a ferocious animal staring at him. The bodyguard couldn't even move a step to answer. Knowing she couldn't build a house because she didn't have a door, she turned around and ran away. Jeon didn't bother to chase after him. It was the stubborn ones who lost their strength. But he ignored these 3 rabbits. Jin Myung looked at him silently and evaluated. Suddenly Sung Jae's screams came from the door. His whole body was soaked. He slammed open the door and ran in. To warn the apostle Bao bitch who had just attacked indiscriminately. Unexpectedly, the inside of the appraisal shop was cluttered with all sorts of things. After Jian's killing spree, isn't this the summoned beast of the saintess Bao bitch? Aha, those are summoned beasts in the eyes of others. But in Jian's eyes these are just pieces of materials dropped for him to pick up. Sung Jae urged him to leave, afraid that later the guards would bring more people and cause trouble. Just as he was about to leave, Jin Myung immediately shouted, when the two of them turned to look at him at the same time. He hesitated. 20 years ago, I followed Li Jian to learn how to craft. So I remember clearly how he fought monsters and collected ingredients. So he used all his courage and loudly asked, if the last match was, "Are you Li Jian?" He didn't answer. He put his index finger to his lips to make a small shushing sign with his mouth. But this expression on his face was so obvious that he knew it all and even did it out of mystery. Jin Myung's dreamy, poetic and sentimental soul caught the signal immediately. He was moved to tears. Maybe Jian was afraid to wipe away his tears. So he turned around and left, making an appointment to talk again next time. That was enough to make Jin Myung extremely happy. He bowed down and shouted loudly, hoping to see you again next time. He nodded lightly and left, leaving the ruined room for the old man, which was an effective way to avoid cleaning the house. Leaving the appraisal shop, Sung Jae and his nephew found an extremely reasonable place to avoid pursuit. A brightly lit coffee shop in the middle of the street, selling all kinds of ice cream and cakes. This guy is 40 years old but still shovels spoonfuls of tea ice cream into his mouth with great pleasure. Sung Jae is so delicious. Eat more and more, looking at Jian's face as if he was determined to eat all the food on the table. Sung Jae hesitantly asked, it's delicious, but I know it's expensive. Do you have money to pay for it? Of course. Jian has no money, but his looting skills are only superior. He brought up the thing the female guard had dropped in. Said he had looked at it for a while and thought it might work. The golden thing with the logo of the water bottle pouring out seems to be a palace insignia, used like a credit card and contains some skills of those people. Sung Jae leaned forward to look closer, realizing that this thing looked like a personal credit card, afraid that if they used it, they would be able to track it here. Jian doesn't care that much. It's okay for him to eat sweets now. Let alone the nephew was not in the mood to eat or drink. He kept kicking one cup after another until Hyuk came from somewhere to greet him. Looking at the expressions of these two men and grandchildren, it is clear that no one expected the Gemini commander to appear in this place. He greeted Sung Jae but asked for a seat at this table to talk to Jian, realizing that Hyuk was the boss who had been bothering Sung Jae these past few days. He didn't chase him away. Just let him sit down. Start by asking if he is the guy who killed the Spider Queen that Sung Jae told about. He seemed to ignore Jian's unwillingness to answer, saying that the spider couldn't even reach Yangwei, but a young man like him could really kill it. So then, what do you plan to do about it? Jian kicked through the third ice cream box and then the fourth ice cream in a row. Hearing Hyuk say he was here to look for outstanding talents. Obviously he wanted to lure Jian to his church. So he asked him what he had to bribe. One of Li Jian's 8 relics will be auctioned in the near future. If you're not busy, could you discuss it with me a bit? Finally, Li Jian's attention was attracted. He put the ice cream scoop on the table, showing an expression until it was time for them to auction their antiques. With cream all over his face, Jian looked up and said he was okay and went straight to the auction floor. Cho Hyuk didn't laugh at his dumb country look. On the contrary, he was very friendly and said that Li Jian's antiques would be held at a place of similar level quite far from them. It is the pinnacle auction floor high in the sky, with the name of the prosperous fortress city, Gakma. That fortress city is not large in area, but because it was built on an island floating in the sky, it became different. That place was lavishly decorated and the Gakma auction floor was also given an entire skyscraper to organize the auction of 102 items in the world. In Gakma's sky hall, Sophie was now sitting on a bench, clutching her neck and trying to breathe. She was wearing a beautiful saint's outfit, but her whole body was shaking. Her face was ashen as if she was sitting in the snow. Until a loud voice rang out. Stephen Marker grumbled, "Stop acting like that and the wine will lose its taste." Sophie glanced at the big guy and cursed in her heart. It was true that he was a well-developed bastard, but for the time being, he had to hold back to avoid disaster. This is the man who surpassed Lee Jian and was next to Stephen Marker. Making Sophie feel safe, he stood up and left, not forgetting to remind him that all of Lee Jian's weapons in this auction were his. "Don't think too much and regret it," she called out worriedly, but the lion saint didn't answer and just kept walking. Left alone in the hall, Sophie took a breath to try to calm herself. After all, this place is Gakma. Whether real or smuggled, the person she is always afraid of cannot appear. But the person on the other side of the glass door that suddenly caught Sophie's attention was Hugo Arthur standing alone on the walkway. Her mood suddenly changed completely. She happily felt that this guy had arrived on time. There was going to be something fun to watch. Hugo didn't come here because of some antiques. But after walking around for a while, he still couldn't find his friend Jian. "I thought that a place with so many expensive relics would attract my friends' attention, so when I arrived, only the treasure came to find me and cause trouble." She lightly nudged Hugo's shoulder from behind, smiled and said, "It's been a long time since I've seen her." The smiling face under the hood made him feel cold. Seeing Sophie Marty again at this time, she acts like she's been friends with her for a long time. But at first she says it's really difficult to meet you. It seems like even Hugo Arthur couldn't conquer that time. Remember back then he was the representative of the 12 saints. If there was a mistake, Sophie would scold him. How could he ignore the fact that the Centaur Church was small, so Hugo's position was lower than the rest? Hugo was still busy looking for his friend, so he didn't want to continue talking and waved her away. But Sophie knew everything. The only thing she knew was not to. With a face full of arrogance, she uttered a successful sentence that made Hugo stiffen, as if he had lost his child, the same way he lost his wife. Bao Bitch's fake face smiled as she continued to dwell on it, asking over and over again, did he think his wife was dead? Hugo's lack of response only made her more vulnerable. Even if he was a centaur saint, he still had to watch his family fall apart. Right? Bao Bitch successfully angered a calm person like Hugo. His whole body lit up with a fiery anger. Where the two people had just stood, there was an explosion that ripped open the wall. Behind the black smoke was Hugo's whole body full of fire. His eyes were filled with anger. "I'm telling you, go away." Sophie didn't get away so easily. She put her hand to her mouth and giggled, using water to put out the fire on Hugo's arm, reminding us that we had a 10-year truce. Don't forget. But actually, seeing Hugo so angry, Bao Bitch showed his face and walked up to Hugo and asked, "Don't you realize that you are just a semi-saint?" Not letting Sophie use the water that had just gathered. There was a sudden call from behind and white light flared up. Jian just called out, "Hey whore." He used 2 fingers to pinch Bao Bitch's forehead, helping her immediately become enlightened. The water drop mark on Sophie's forehead was red. Her eyes were full of white, not knowing if she was enlightened or if she was logged out. Jian looked at Sophie's body falling to the ground in disgust, while his friend turned around to look at him. "Oh my friend, why is this such a dramatic time?" Hearing that Hugo was worried that he was doing something stupid, he went looking for him. Jian folded his arms in confusion and asked if I had a 3-headed child. "Second, do you like me?" Seeing that the atmosphere was too disturbing, Jian closed the hem of his shirt, closing his buttocks away from Hugo. "But don't forget to show your constipated face as you look at your bent body on the ground. Why do you always see this bitch everywhere you go? Don't tell me this bitch likes me." Hugo was speechless. This guy kicked several rocks before coming here. Don't you know? Li Jian, in the eyes of you and your friends, may be a guy who was pumped with Too much power and became a pervert. But in Sophie's eyes he is not just that. Bao bitch thought she hated Jian. But in reality she was afraid of him. Afraid of his face full of deep scars and his aggressive personality. He never forgave anyone who teased him. But those blind, white eyes always threw a sharp look full of contempt at Sophie, making her never forget it. One day of heavy rain and wind more than 20 years ago. In the temple of Aquarius. The noise of the subordinates stopped Zion from entering. The female housekeeper of the Aquarius mansion ran out, spread her arms, determined, did not let him continue, only to see his terrible face under the flash of lightning, uttering only one word, "Get out." "What is this?" Sophie's voice rang out, making him turn his head to see her wearing a nightgown. Angrily, crossing her arms and asking him what the hell he was thinking. Daring to barge into this place. With a loud bang, Li Jian slammed the entire punch of his bandaged hand into the wall behind Sophie, scaring her to death. Her eyes were filled with anger, with dark, brown scars clearly visible, and she asked in a harsh voice if she really wanted to die. Bao bitch tried his best to be stubborn and asked what the hell he was doing. Just to make Li Jian mad, he questioned him for sending her back to the rear to treat those attacked by the disaster beasts, and why she was still loitering at the shrine. He squeezed her hand and roared. Their limbs were broken trying to protect her. Do you know that? No more talking. He grabbed her wrist and dragged her away, forcing Sophie to go save people. Fuck, even if those guys die, no one will care. Dying to protect me and humanity is an honor. Why do you look down on saints like that? I can handle humanity's curses enough. I don't want to clean up that trash. Those stubborn words made Li Jian stop. He turned his bandaged face towards her and asked, "What did you just say?" Putting her hand up to cover her nose, criticizing Jian for smelling like an owl, Sophie affirmed that she was determined not to come to the rescue of the wounded soldiers. Now go home and get some sleep. Get up and put on makeup for the interview tomorrow. Shaking the wrist that had just been tightly grasped out of Jian's hand, Sophie was almost rubbing the swollen spot from being squeezed by him with a look of disgust on her face. Jian's hand rushed forward and slapped Bao bitch's face, making her want to throw her mouth out. He shouted directly with an angry voice that echoed throughout the temple, then dragged her for treatment until she fainted from exhaustion. So for Sophie, Li Jian was a damn bastard. Cursing at him extremely hard, Li Jian's face appeared, asking for a good night. Sophie's eyes opened wide, realizing that she had just fallen asleep and her whole body was frozen against the chair. Right in front was Li Jian with his familiar disdainful face and Hugo Arthur standing next to him. Realizing that he was in the hands of the person he feared the most, Bao bitch let out a scream that echoed throughout the building. After screaming, she spoke again with her mouth. Who do you think you are to dare to do this to a saint? Quickly, take it off me. I want to slap her again. Even after 20 years or 200 years, her mouth will still be the same. Sophie's brain rolled continuously inside, telling herself that she was no longer afraid of him like she was 20 years ago. Today she would come to work with him. Her hand glowed with the light of acid to melt the dazzling string. Sophie's plan was to escape this place and go find Stephen Marker to give us a good fight. And eat another mouthful of food that made her feel bored. Trembling and bowing her head, both angry and bitter, Li Jian's index finger was still smoking, reminding her that no matter what she was thinking, don't show it on her face. Then something on his middle finger was smoking. Bao bitch looked up and laughed. Haha. That flex right there was an acid self-defense skill that activated whenever someone used violence on her. Screaming with pleasure, Sophie's head was full of painful images of Jian having his whole body corroded by acid, kneeling down and begging her to forgive him. Ah, what's the strongest skill? I also have something very strong. He stuck out his middle finger to show her that the acid had long since disappeared. But he was not stupid enough to brag that he had the ability to self-heal the fleas. That made Bao bitch that scream loudly, unable to believe his eyes. After we finished chatting happily, we allowed Lee Jian to account for what happened between us. I heard you claim to be my doctor. So let's get the first punch. You sent those nonsense terrorists in the appraisal store, right? There were almost 10 people. But we ended up with 5 to get to know each other. Then what the hell did you say to Ta-Ak-Su just now? Closing in another 50 punches. Looking at her sad face, Jian kept his hand in the shape of Buddha Tathagata and asked, "Is there anything else you want to say?" After waiting for a while, he didn't say anything, so he rushed forward with his hand. Hey, wait with us. Suddenly, even if she didn't lose at a card game, she'd have to suck it up. Her screams of protest didn't stop. And Hugo didn't feel like complaining. His friend was like that. Whether male or female, he was beaten as usual. Even though Lee Jian had every reason to do so, Hugo would never hit a woman. At the most he would just hit her a little. But wait, am I having a problem with my eyes? Why does it feel like Jian's divine power is increasing with each noodle he takes? Hugo was not wrong. With every flick of the treasure chest, he took away her divine power. The invincible saint of boredom was in full swing. Sophie suddenly collapsed inexplicably, feeling swollen and foaming at the mouth. All signs that she had fainted. Jian just stopped. The system panel suddenly jumped up before his eyes, congratulating his current divine power reaching 50% and successfully unlocking the holy divine power. What is this new term? Why don't you Google it? What is the divine state? Just because he was an illegitimate child and not blessed by any zodiac sign, he didn't know that this was the power to maintain absolute godhood. Knowing late is also a good thing, because the system tells him that if he doesn't have it, he can rob it, whether it's divine power or divine status. In the end, you still have to steal to get it. Good system. Jian rubbed his head in confusion. With just a few flicks, he got 20% of the magical power from the precious stone. Why didn't he receive it when he beat Yang Wei before? Because he hadn't unlocked the skill yet? Now that he received the news that he can still increase his strength, Jian feels happy and not angry. The way to increase strength is generally easy. Just punch others to rob them and that's it. Hugo stood behind him and reminded him that he should interrogate this Aquarius woman about the knife. But Jian dismissed her as definitely not the person who dared to stab him in the back. Besides, he already found someone capable of investigating for him. Hugo nodded as if he understood. But in his mind, this friend turned out to be just looking for an excuse to torture Bao Bitch. Suddenly, the phone in his pocket vibrated. Hugo leaned his head in curiously and asked him where he found the phone. Jian replied lightly that he borrowed it from an acquaintance. After showing off how strong he looked, he told me to go to the auction hall. Hugo wants to throw the Aquarius girl away wherever he wants. So he'll tell him to get rid of the quail right away and lay it out for someone else to serve. He and the girl who had just woken up were knocked unconscious. Suddenly the door opened again. Hugo thought his friend had forgotten something, so he turned back. But the new arrival made him extremely nervous. There are 8 billion people in the world. Why does this bearded guy keep appearing? In front of Hugo, Stephen Markle loomed just like the male protagonist of the story. His eyes glanced over and he realized that behind Hugo was a baby who was crushed into a chair and passed out. Hugo didn't mean to explain. Just stared at Stephen, who suddenly collapsed. A bunch of yellow electricity sizzling around him. Ask him, Hugo, what are you doing here? When asked, he asked, why does it sound so threatening? Or is bitch actually Stephen's daughter? He took off his expensive gold glasses. Cool as a toilet with a werewolf-like appearance. That reminded Hugo that he hadn't seen her in a long time but didn't have time to flirt. No one has free time. No one is happy to meet this big guy. Stephen looked at Bao Bitch, who looked like a dog, and said that he and she were an alliance. You and me alliance. Why the heck are there only 2 people? That's it. Now tell me, why are you here, Hugo? I probably thought that if Hugo asked this question, he would say that where to go is the individual's right to ask such a stupid question. Steven tucked his glasses into the chest of his bodysuit, hugging his budding breasts, and asked if he was here for Jian's relic? Oh, probably not, because if there was, I wouldn't have the money to buy it. Right. Damn, I know that Hugo is poor. But it's true that this guy and her son must be a set of pots and pans molded specifically for each other. When each of them opens their mouth, it's the insatiable spiral of poverty of a centaur. Smiling to show off his beauty and health, Hugo directly asked Steven how he was still collecting the sacred objects that Jian had created. Since that ancient day when Jian still existed among the 13 saints, Steven has always felt inferior to him. Using Jian as a milestone to try to overcome, he has long been trying to collect all the sacred objects related to him. Hey, don't tell me, who would think that continuing to do that would make him as strong as Jian? Steven didn't say anything, blowing away the dirt and rocks under his feet. As expected, Hugo's words hit the right nerve. Intending to separate gently, who would have thought that Steven would actually blow up the floor? Hugo cautiously called out the fire that surrounded him and saw that Steven's hand was filled with electricity. He didn't attack Hugo, but grabbed his wrist and squeezed the flames away. Hugo's face turned pale and he felt the force in Steven's hand getting stronger and stronger. His eyes were fierce, warning him not to take any risks. With every sentence Steven said, his muscled fingers tightened a little, reminding Hugo that you're just a stupid idiot, so don't mention Jian in front of me. As soon as he finished speaking, he twisted Hugo's arm, his whole body erupting with a wonderful image behind him to prove that his strength was far superior to that damn Jian. Holy man, there's something wrong. His subordinates came to inform him that the twins had bought all the Jian items. The new guy was startled and turned around, violently shaking Hugo's hand away, not showing any more authority to him, but leading his subordinates and leaving immediately. Hugo called out for Steven to take this bitch away, but he didn't pay much attention and told Hugo to do whatever he wanted. Right now the #1 priority is the auction. This bitch comes later. Before leaving, I didn't forget to kindly remind myself, if you want to live, take care of yourself and carefully control your personality. Hugo teased with his lips. His words were so touching that it made my heart cold. Despite such a fierce battle of smoke and fire, Val bitch was still snoring. Waiting until Steven was gone, Hugo dared to look down at his hand, which was severely burned after the Lion Saint's electric shock. The feeling of inferiority resonated in Hugo's heart. He knew he was not okay at all because he was always the weakest of the 12 blessed zodiac signs. The Gakma auction floor was shining with black light like a paradise. Through the glass hallway door, one could see the VIP room with the door closed. In the auction area, the female MC excitedly hammered an item. For the twins. Now we will take a break to prepare for round 2. Just waiting for the teenagers in the room to howl with excitement, Li Jian took another cool item into his hands. Hyuk sat next to him and congratulated him on buying what he wanted. At this moment, Jian scratched his head and scratched his ears in grateful gratitude. Thanks to him inviting him into the VIP room and allowing him to shop comfortably, Jian was able to collect these items. Cho Hyuk lifted his glasses and reiterated that this was all to recruit him to the Gemini Church. Not paying attention to Sung Jae sitting next to him, and doing a rough calculation. It cost billions of dong. He glanced at Sung Jae, asking him to help pay for the wine. Forgot to bring my card and it's gone. Not daring to disobey his boss, Sung Jae was about to rummage through his pocket to find money. Jian had stuck out a dirty black card and comfortably said, "That's what I want this afternoon." Hyuk reached into his hand to fumble with his anti-airbag. When did this guy get the black card without even knowing it? Jian picked up the card in his hand and reminded him truthfully, "No matter what, don't ask your subordinates to pay for you." Being told that directly to his face, Hyuk didn't dare to object. With his mouth, he kept saying, "Okay la," but gradually realized that this guy looked immature but liked to sit on other people's heads. Even so, He successfully destroyed the Spider Queen. Hyuk's mission is to take advantage of this talented person to work for his church. Waiting a while longer when Jian had drunk a lot of alcohol, Hyuk started to get to the main topic today, with a long series of compliments about the potential of an S or SS grader. If given the blessing of the Birch Association, the lettuce would definitely be great. Jian took a sip of wine, realizing that the pale purple bone screen that Hyuk had just released had the effect of manipulating other people's psychology. Just like a high-class guy talking about how he could earn $1,000 by joining a guild one day, Hyuk used all his foul-mouthed skills to dance for Jian. Whether it's money, treasure, wealth, glory, or an admired career, just swim into the Birch Association and you'll have it all. It's all free. Joining the guild will give you more power than me. Come on, lie down in my hand. Let's conquer the path to the multi-level Birch Peak together. It looked so eloquent and convincing. But suddenly Jian opened his mouth and laughed like he had a good time. Today was so fun. The speech was very good. Suddenly he changed his face and asked slowly, "So you're telling me Jian to become that bald pig's hunting dog?" Choi Hyuk suddenly felt like his head was covered in sweat. The person in front of him just now was a comfortable young man from the countryside. Why'd I feel like he's angry now? Just as he was about to change the subject to cool the atmosphere, from outside the door came the voice of the auctioneer asking permission to enter so that the new item could be successfully finalized. He looked at the crap the employee had just handed out, thinking that it was his own thing that he took, but they told him to give him a power of attorney later. How disgusting. Only then did Choi Hyuk realize that he had just taken away an item belonging to Saint Lee Jian. He smiled, picked up the wire with the figure 8 face, and said this was quite useful for him. Hyuk thought to himself that he was being stupid. This young man was careless and grabbed all of Steven's things. He jumped in and punched each guy in the nostrils and it was ruined. Just as he was about to advise Jian to return it, someone blew up the VIP room door, blowing it into pieces. The thick smoke and dust caused all 4 people to turn around and see Steven aggressively rushing in, muttering curses at the son of a bitch. Looking at his face, he looked more tense than the owner who had just lost his beloved dog. He asked in a harsh voice, "Who touched my things?" It turned out to be someone he knew. Jian turned his head to look at the brazen thug who had just kicked open the door, half surprised and half not, knowing that this was the person hunting for his relics. Choi Hyuk stepped forward to be the king of lip-smacking, the god of diplomacy, apologizing in all kinds of ways, blaming the country newcomer for not knowing things. Steven saw that the commander's attitude was a little less aggressive. He just needed to return the items and it would be okay. Seeing that it was going well, Choi Hyuk suggested that Steven go to the front desk to pay and receive the items. Unexpectedly, the guy laughed evilly, grabbed Hyuk's head and asked if he was going to touch Hyuk's things and then play cards. He trembled under the big hand and didn't dare to resist. He just cursed in his heart that this big guy was looking for an excuse to take things without spending money. "Hey, stop yelling for me." The sound of Jian sitting on the sofa rang out, causing both of them to turn their heads to look. "Hey, I won the auction so I can buy it. Why do you ask for the same? If you like it so much, will I sell it for 200 billion with a protection fee?" Steven didn't know who the idiot in front of him was, being arrogant like that. A few seconds later, he burst out laughing. He didn't expect that there would be such a strong-mouthed guy in the Aries church. Choi Hyuk felt like he was about to break down when he heard this. This brat wanted to commit suicide. How could even the Lion Saint dare to provoke him? Men are supposed to be like that. There's no way you're talking to me above your teeth. Steven pushed Hyuk aside, marching towards Jian menacingly. The guy flashed electricity and flashed clothes like that. But he set up a game to introduce each other. "Let me tell you. Then I will declare my name with the most prestigious twist of the neck and charge." The electric charge. Smelling provocatively, Jian asked him what was going on. In his mind, he thought this guy was also capable of being powerful, much stronger than before. It's true that This zodiac sign is very suitable for fighting. When you come you pick it up. When you touch it you rush down. Lord Sun Lam is different from liking dog blood. Although the fighting spirit is not as persistent as Aries or Aquarius. But with this progressive team, one cannot help but praise the lion. Once you show off your strength, no matter what you say, you have to tear that person to pieces to vent your anger. Right? Jian wants to see if a lion puts its claws on a snake. What will happen? This heat is diarrhea. You hear? He wanted to advise Steven something like that but didn't say it. Just let that tyrannical hand rush towards him. As soon as his thick fingers touched Jian's shoulder, electric rays stirred the atmosphere. The surrounding people were so scared that they just wanted to hide. His feet are so cold when he walks like this. Sung Jae still tries to scream, "Oh brother." While Hyuk was reciting the song, "I'm asking," and saying goodbye in his mind. Steven had no intention of killing him. He just left his legs paralyzed and put him in a wheelchair. Yet strangely, there was a relaxed smile on the lips of the young man in front of him. He howled, "Are you brushing dust off my shirt?" Steven didn't understand what had just happened, because the attack he had used certainly had a direct impact on his body. "You used instant infusion to redirect my attack?" The twins are the best at this game. But Jian is the worst. He pushed Steven's hand away and continued cursing that he had a stupid mind and developed limbs. "Haha, your stone wall destruction has been neutralized by me. Is there any other skill that can affect it? I remember at that time you asked me to teach you to help humanity, but now you're showing off your strength like a clown?" Not to mention the murderous aura on Jian's body. That story of course only the 13th Saint and Steven knew, so the gray-faced guy didn't understand who this guy was. Suddenly, the auction hall rang out to welcome you and everyone back to the second round. Steven immediately turned his attention away, not paying attention to Jian anymore. He turned away, pointed at Jian and said the auction was an important matter that needed to be resolved first. "Keep that necklace tight until later and I'll come find it later." As soon as Steven left, Sung Jae immediately ran to him to see if there were any dents on his body. Only the shoulder of his shirt was torn like a dog bite. Hyuk saw it but didn't dare go over and ask, how did he dodge just now when Steven's saint-level attack couldn't be redirected? Even an S-rank commander like Hyuk cannot do that. This strangely calm look only made Hyuk more curious about who this young man was. In the second round of auction, the host announced that this was a sacred object that everyone was looking forward to seeing. Surely you remember the Berlin incident 24 years ago, on an island in Germany. A strange mist lingered in the area, melting all the weapons and turrets. It was so terrible that the 12 saints had no way to enter that area except hero Li Jian. Now we will reveal the sacred item that Li Jian used to overcome disasters. Steven couldn't help but let a smile appear on his lips, waiting forever for the item to finally arrive. He still remembered the day 24 years ago, on the impenetrable island in Germany. Helicopters hovering over the island continuously update news. It's been 4 days since Li Jian entered, but no one knows what's inside because he hasn't come out yet. Many saints including Steven tried to get in, but the distance they could reach was still at the edge of the central area. Steven was not satisfied that Li Jian could go in alone when he did not have that ability, even though he was armed to the teeth and had an army escorting him. He sat there thinking for a long time, trying to figure out the difference between him and the scar-faced bastard that caused such a huge difference in strength between the two. Suddenly, the subordinate pointed to the right, announcing that Li Jian had returned and brought something that Steven was sure was the answer he had been looking for a long time. The journalists looked at the scene of Li Jian walking out in shock. He actually returned with his book intact, following a trail of tea. At that time, Li Jian always wore a mask when going out to avoid scaring old women and children. Another trophy was snatched away by Li Jian, but this time Steven was not angry. As if he had realized something important, He gently called the troops to retreat. Seeing the saint throw away the weapons in his hand, his subordinates asked in surprise and found out that Stephen had something better for him. As soon as he saw Lee Jian step out, Stephen looked at him and knew the answer. The thing that would make him stand on par with Lee Jian was the weapon. So now in the auction hall, when they opened the strongest weapon Lee Jian used in the battle that destroyed Berlin that year, everyone turned their attention. Lee Jian also peered in to see what it was. As soon as the fabric was pulled off, Stephen couldn't help but smile. It was what he had been waiting for so long to become unparalleled in the world. Lee Jian brought the T-bone with him when he left the Bone Blind Island. Outside the tower,